I still remember the exact moment it shifted. Thanksgiving dinner, the kind with mashed potatoes, too much gravy, and too many half-fake smiles. My sister raised her glass and said, "We voted you're not family anymore." They laughed, they clapped, and I sat there, frozen, realizing something I should have seen years ago. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who keeps taking, and who finally stops giving. For years, I was the one who always showed up. Birthdays, broken cars, overdue bills. They called, I answered. They needed help, I gave it. And each time, I told myself this is what family does. But slowly, it changed. The thank yous stopped. The asks became expectations. One day, it wasn't "can you help?" It was "we need it by Friday." Have you felt that? Like love has a cost. Like loyalty is a currency they keep spending but never return. Let me be clear, this isn't about money. It's about value. Because when your presence is only appreciated when you're useful, that's not family. That's a transaction. A friend once told me, the moment they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource, it's already over. He was right. One day, I checked my account after a family weekend. It was drained. No warning, no apology. Just shrugged shoulders and one sentence that still burns. "We needed it more than you." That's when I realized when family stops feeling like family, you have every right to walk away. You're not breaking a bond. You're reclaiming your peace. And here's the real question. What happens when the good son finally says no? Let's talk about that next. When you're the responsible one in the family, it doesn't come with a medal. There's no applause, no special dinner in your honor. Instead, it comes quietly with expectations that grow heavier over time. You're the one who remembers birthdays, who drives mom to appointments, who covers the bill just this once when someone forgets their wallet. And at first, it feels good. It feels like love, like you're doing the right thing. But slowly, something shifts. Helping becomes assumed. Kindness becomes a duty, and you start to disappear behind the role they've handed you. I remember my friend James telling me a story about how he paid his sister's rent 3 months in a row. No thank you, no promise to pay him back. Just a text that said, "Got it." He laughed when he told me, but his eyes didn't. He said, "It's like they only call when something's wrong and I'm the fix." The invisible cost isn't just money. It's time. It's peace of mind. It's the moments you give up for yourself because someone else needs you more. It's how your dreams get pushed to the back of the shelf so someone else's emergency can take center stage. And here's the part no one talks about. It's exhausting. Being the strong one all the time makes you feel like you're not allowed to break, like you have to smile through it even when you're burning out. But the truth is, strength doesn't mean silence, and responsibility doesn't mean you have to carry everyone's weight on your shoulders. The lesson? If being the reliable one starts to feel like a burden instead of a bond, it's time to pause. It's okay to help, but it's also okay to have limits. And sometimes setting those limits is the first real act of self-love. Because if you're always carrying everyone else, you'll eventually forget how to stand for yourself. Let's move into the next part, where we talk about how guilt keeps that weight on our shoulders for longer than it should. Support is one of the most beautiful parts of family. We show up for each other, we lend a hand when someone falls behind, and we give not because we have to, but because we want to. But what happens when that giving is no longer a gift and becomes an expectation? When support stops feeling like love and starts feeling like pressure? There's a quiet moment that marks this shift. Maybe it's the first time they don't say thank you. Maybe it's when your help is taken without asking. Maybe it's when someone tells you, "You've always handled this before. What's the big deal?" I remember hearing about a woman named Lisa who helped her brother through a rough patch after his divorce. She covered his bills, picked up his kids from school, even helped him find a job. But 2 years later, nothing had changed. He was still leaning on her. And when she finally said she couldn't help with rent that month, he got angry. That's the moment she realized it wasn't support anymore. It was dependence. And it was draining her. Support becomes exploitation when it's one-sided. When your giving is met with guilt tripping. When you feel more obligated than appreciated. When saying no makes you the bad guy. And here's the hard truth. People don't always realize they're exploiting someone. They're just used to you being the safety net, the soft landing, the one who always says yes. But just because you've always helped doesn't mean you always should. Love without respect is not love, it's use. The lesson here? Your generosity should never come at the cost of your peace. Real support lifts everyone. It doesn't push one person to the ground to keep the others standing. In the next section, we'll talk about the role guilt plays in keeping us stuck in this cycle, even when we know it's time to step away. There's a strange silence that follows the word no, especially when it's said for the first time to people who are used to hearing yes. If you've always been the one to step in, to offer help, to fill the gaps no one else notices, then the first time you say no, it hits differently. Not just for you, but for them. It's as if you've broken an unspoken agreement, one you never agreed to in the first place. I once read about a man named Jordan. For years, he helped his younger brother, covered his rent, paid off credit cards, even co-signed a car loan. But when Jordan finally refused to fund his brother's business idea, the shift was instant. The gratitude turned into coldness. The conversation stopped, and soon after, the family group chat went quiet, for him at least. That's the moment when you say no kindly, calmly, and suddenly you're selfish, ungrateful, or not like you used to be. That moment reveals the real reason they were close, not for who you are, but for what you give. It's painful, of course, because you want to believe the love was unconditional, that your presence mattered beyond your bank account, your favors, your reliability. But here's what that moment teaches you: boundaries are a filter. They show you who's truly with you and who's only with what you can offer. Saying no isn't a betrayal. It's a beginning of choosing your mental health, your time, your worth. And when the no feels too heavy and the guilt starts creeping in, remember, we'll talk about that next. Because guilt is the glue that often keeps us stuck in roles we never chose. There's a moment, quiet but powerful, when the fog starts to clear, when instead of feeling confused or guilty, you begin to see things for what they are. And often, it starts by putting things in writing. Some people keep journals. Others, like Daniel, a man whose story still sits with me, create folders. After years of quietly giving, loaning money, covering bills, co-signing loans, Daniel started tracking it all. Not to get even, not to throw it in anyone's face, but because something inside him said, this matters. My effort deserves to be seen. So he began collecting receipts, bank transfers, screenshots of text requests, even the thank yous or lack of them. It felt strange at first, like he was preparing for a confrontation he didn't want. But deep down, he knew truth needs a voice. That folder became more than just paper. It was a mirror reflecting not just what he gave, but how little was returned. And when the day came when the accusations started, when the family turned, it wasn't anger he pulled out. It was the truth. And there's something quietly powerful about standing in truth. Not yelling, not defending, just holding up a mirror and letting people see what they've chosen to ignore. The lesson? You don't need to argue when you have evidence. You don't need to beg to be believed when the truth is documented. Facts don't scream, but they speak. And sometimes that quiet truth is what finally frees you. Next, we'll talk about what happens after the folder opens. When silence falls. When they see it all and still try to twist the story. Because that's often what comes next. And you'll need to be ready. Setting boundaries isn't about building walls. It's about drawing a line between what you allow and what you don't. And when you've spent years being taken for granted, that line might be the first honest thing you've drawn for yourself in a long time. After Daniel presented the folder after the truth was laid bare, his family reacted with shock, denial, even anger. But not one of them offered accountability. Instead, they questioned him, called him dramatic, said he was breaking the family. That was when Daniel realized emotional boundaries weren't enough. He needed legal ones too. So he made changes. Real ones. Quiet ones. He removed his name as emergency contact, revoked power of attorney, closed joint accounts, changed passwords, froze access. And emotionally, he stopped picking up the guilt, stopped trying to fix what they broke, stopped carrying their shame like it was his. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of self-respect. Because boundaries, real, meaningful boundaries, aren't about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself safe, especially when those closest to you forget how to treat you with kindness. The lesson here? Love without boundaries is not love. It's a trap. And the first time you say, this is where I end and you begin, something powerful happens. You begin to feel like you again. And when you do, you'll start hearing something you might have forgotten. Silence. The kind that's not empty but peaceful. In the next part, we'll explore how silence isn't loneliness, it's healing, and how, for the first time in a long time, Daniel found clarity in the quiet. Silence can feel terrifying, especially when you've been surrounded by noise for years. Demands, guilt, phone calls in the middle of the night, texts that say just one more favor. But for Daniel, when the storm finally passed, there was only quiet. And at first, that scared him. He thought he'd feel lonely, thought the absence of family, even a toxic one, would leave a hole. But what he found instead was space. Space to think, to breathe, to live. No more late-night Venmo requests. No more walking on eggshells at family dinners. No more wondering if love would show up only when the bills did. Instead, mornings started with fresh coffee and a quiet sunrise. Walks without tension clinging to his shoulders. Deep sleep, full breaths. He booked the dentist appointment he'd put off for years. Started seeing a therapist. Not because he was broken, but because he was finally allowed to care for himself. That silence? It wasn't empty. It was sacred. And in it, he discovered something simple but life-changing. Peace doesn't always come with a celebration. Sometimes it just looks like sitting on your own porch, hearing nothing and realizing no one is coming to take from you. The small lesson here: sometimes what feels like loneliness is actually freedom in disguise. And when you stop mistaking obligation for connection, you create room for peace. And in the next part, we'll see how Daniel began to rebuild, how he took that peace and used it to create a life where kindness wasn't a currency, but a choice freely given. Sometimes, even after everything, people still don't get it. Daniel had hoped that, once the dust settled, anyone in the family would finally understand why he walked away, why he said no, why he stood up for himself. But the messages kept coming. First, they blamed him. Then they guilted him. And finally, they begged. What they didn't understand was that Daniel didn't want revenge. He wanted respect. He wasn't punishing them. He was protecting himself. To them, he was still the one who always helped, still the one they could call in the middle of the night, still the wallet with a heart attached. Even after police reports and frozen accounts, they asked, "Why did you go so far?" But Daniel knew the real question was, why did I let it go so far before finally stopping? He didn't owe them his savings. He didn't owe them his sleep, his peace, his silence. What he wanted, what he had always wanted, was a family that saw him as a person, not a provider. He realized that some people don't want reconciliation. They want access. Not to rebuild trust, but to reopen the door they once abused. The small lesson: you can explain your truth 100 different ways, and some people still won't hear it because listening would mean facing what they did. Daniel learned to stop waiting for understanding from those who refused to look inward. He started building a life where his worth wasn't tied to how much he gave. And in the next part, we'll see how that life began to take shape and how Daniel, slowly and quietly, began to move forward with strength and clarity. It often comes from where you least expect it. For Daniel, the recognition didn't come from his parents, not from his sister, not from the people he had carried for years. It came in the form of a quiet email from someone on the outside looking in. "Thank you," it said. "I see now what you've been through. You were never cold. You were brave." It was from Kelly, his brother-in-law's sister, someone he barely knew, but who had been watching, observing, understanding in silence. She saw what many had refused to admit, that Daniel's quiet strength wasn't indifference. It was survival. That one message shifted something in him, because when you've been invisible for so long, being seen, really seen, feels like sunlight after years of shade. It reminded him that he wasn't crazy. He wasn't selfish. He wasn't wrong for saying no. He was just the first one to break the cycle. This moment of validation wasn't about applause. It wasn't about being right. It was about healing. About knowing that someone, somewhere, understood the weight he carried and the courage it took to finally set it down. And when someone sees you not as what you provide, but for who you are, it changes everything. In the final part, we'll reflect on what Daniel gained, not in money, not in status, but in peace, clarity, and a life finally lived for himself. There's a moment after the anger settles and the dust clears when you realize something profound. You didn't lose them. You found you. Daniel thought walking away from his family would leave a hole. He braced for loneliness, for guilt, for grief. But what came instead was stillness, clarity, space to breathe. He started going for morning walks, picked up cooking again, listened to music he loved without anyone rolling their eyes. He even signed up for therapy, not because he was broken, but because for once, he wanted to understand himself, not just be understood by others. He no longer jumped at every message. No more PM emergencies, no more guilt dressed up as love. The silence that once scared him, it became his sanctuary. He didn't just remove toxic TIs. He rebuilt his own identity from someone who gave endlessly to someone who finally chose to receive peace. And here's the truth many never tell you: setting boundaries doesn't make you heartless. It makes you whole. When you stop letting others write your worth, you begin the work of writing your own story. Not as the good son, the backup plan, or the family wallet, just as you. So if you're at that edge, if you're the one holding everything together while slowly falling apart, maybe it's time to ask, what would it look like if you chose you? Because you don't owe your silence. You owe yourself your freedom. And sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't staying, it's walking away to become the person you were always meant to be.